Hey guys, it's Curtis. I'm back in the garage gym, and this morning I wanted to go on a little bit of a rant. So I got my first squat stand back in 2015. It was a Rogue SM1. It was a Monster Series, and I got it in their deals page. What you would see is like their boneyard. I actually haven't seen it in there since then, but essentially it was like a mismatch between matte black paint and shiny paint, and I got it for like 400 bucks. There were a couple issues though, because at the time, again, this is way back, I'm like getting into garage gyms initially, really don't know much about equipment. I didn't actually understand any of the differences between a 5/8 inch rack and a 1 inch rack. So of course, when I got my squat stand in, I set it up, it came with J-cups, I was able to do lifts using a barbell that I'd purchased, and it was great. But then I was like, hey, I wanna do other stuff. So I jump on Craigslist and I search and I find a dip unit from Rogue. It's got the word Monster in the description, but it was a Monster Light. Now again, I didn't know the difference, so I show up, I pay the guy cash. It didn't really dawn on me to like check the pin size. That just wasn't a thing I was thinking about at the time because I was pretty excited and unprepared. So I get home, I put it on my rack, and I realize that there's a ton of play in how this thing actually attaches to the rack. And that is, of course, unless you know anything about the Monster Series, which it has that keyhole. And so I put it on that way, and I was like, oh, well, maybe that's why this has a smaller pin. Maybe it's supposed to be used this way. I know now that that's not what that's for. It does work for that. It doesn't work that well. But if we fast forward a little bit, I started to update my gym. And of course, at that point, I'm watching YouTube reviews, watching people like Basement Brandon. I really like the way his rack looks, that blue power rack that used to be in his basement. I like that color already. So I execute a purchase for my very own 490C power rack from Rogue Fitness, a Monster Light Series power rack. Because in my head, I was like, oh, well, the Monster Series is seemingly nicer, but the Monster Light does everything the Monster does, it just has smaller holes. Now, if we fast forward again to 2021, we fast forward through two moves completely across the country, and now what's behind me is my 1 inch series rack from Surplus Strength, the ARC series rack. So why did I make that switch? Let's discuss the features that are really sold and pushed hard on the 5/8 inch rack that I found were mostly useless and incredibly overhyped. So first up on my list of things that I think are wildly overhyped for 5/8 inch racks, and that is west side hole spacing. Now I get it. The guys at Westside and the girls at Westside are strong as hell, and who doesn't want to be strong? And conjugate is a really cool word, which makes you think that if you get something that has Westside in the name, you're somehow magically going to make all those Westside gains. The point I'm trying to make is that Westside hole spacing is basically just marketing. That 1 inch adjustment throughout, I hear people all the time talking about like, oh, well, me and my wife train together and this works really well because her arms, I guess, are like 1 inch shorter than mine. So what I'm going to say here might piss a few people off, but I really don't care. When I had Westside hole spacing, I thought it was going to be the latest and greatest thing. Like, oh, 1 inch adjustment. I can get my bench height perfect to where I want it. I get my safety's height perfect to where I want it. Here's the deal. I'm benching like 315. 1 inch doesn't matter. I'm just saying, all right? Like that 1 inch adjustment doesn't matter. The Westside hole spacing was made for guys that are benching like 1,000 pounds, not 200 pounds. Really what I found that Westside hole spacing did for me was basically, it was the king of, I'm going to go ahead and make it really difficult to perfectly align my J-cups or my safeties on both sides of the rack. On that same note, so when it comes to spacing, so one, Westside hole spacing is just overrated. Like, it's stupid. If you look at Rogue, their Monster Light line, if you look at Bells of Steel's Hydro line, basically those 5/8 inch power racks on the side of the uprights where like things would get stored, like plate pins, etc. It's a 6 inch hole spacing, which is super annoying because everywhere else it's 2 inch hole spacing. Now Rep gets a little bit of credit here because the PR 4000 series has 2 inch hole spacing on all four sides. So good job to Rep Fitness on winning that party. But basically, why not just make those holes throughout? Now, we're gonna get to the cost savings next, but I imagine that the cost savings from not having to laser cut those holes probably saves some money, which helps the company get that entry line price more to that entry line. But here's the deal, is it's gonna limit you on where you can put attachments. And newsflash, not all attachments are gonna go and pin in to the front of the rack. Last part, and I just kind of alluded to it, is the price. Now, yes, you will save some money if you go with the 5/8" version of any company's rack that also offers a 1" rack. For instance, if we look at Rogue Fitness with the RM4, you're going to be charged about $1,585 plus tax and shipping. And if you went with the Monster Light version of that same one, which is like the RML 490C, if we're doing direct comparisons, you're going to end up paying about $1,200. Now, the Rep PR 5000 series rack, if you configure it to be as close to the Rogue Monster, the RM4, as close as possible as you can get, is going to come in right at $1,129, and the PR 4000 series, configured the same way, comes in at $989. So basically what we end up with is a savings of $385 with the Rogue line and $140 with the Rep line. Now obviously you're going to save a lot more money if you go Rep. It's an import rack. They're still very high quality racks, but it's not American made, it's not American or Canadian steel, it's just different, right? So like, I'm sorry for people that get all pissed off that American stuff costs more money. It costs more money because Americans demand to be paid more than people in China. The issue I have with the cost savings is that, yes, you will save some money on the front end, but it's going to end up costing you more on the back end because there's a high likelihood that you're going to want to use attachments later. Now, the attachments for the 5/8" versions are also less expensive, but the point I'm trying to make is that you're going to have less options for attachments. So like I said, west side hole spacing, the 6" side hole spacing, and the cheaper cost are some of the reasons that companies will market their 5/8" as more of like their entry line series. But here's the stuff about the 1" that I really do appreciate. And first off, and again, I kind of got to this as the third point, 1" attachments are just better attachments. They're better made, they are stronger. A 5/8" J-cup will hold all the load that you will potentially lift. I'd be willing to bet that the strongest human on earth can get underneath a 5/8" J-cup rack, so like a PR 4000, a Bell's of Steel Hydra, a Crandall Fitness Power Rack, all of those 5/8" version, the strongest human in the world could get underneath that and they could re-rack into that J-cup, they could probably drop onto those safeties and they're gonna be just fine. But those aren't the attachments I'm talking about. The attachments I'm talking about are most easily kind of demonstrated by just talking about one, which is like a leg roller. So if you look at 5/8" leg rollers on the market, all of them come with like a flip-in bracket, which is kind of inconvenient and it limits you on where you can put it. Again, it's not the end of the world, but it's just a good example of why 1" attachments are better. So you have to drop in that 5/8" leg roller and then you can do your movements and it works just fine. But the reason that the 1" attachment is just better is because with the 1" version, you basically just thread it in and then put your nut on the other side of it and you're able to pretty much sit on this, almost anybody. Now I imagine there's some of you out there that are pretty damn strong and you would probably sit on this and you could bend it if you put enough force into it. But I weigh 210 pounds or so and I can sit on this when I use like my goat attachment and it won't bend. Enough on that. So like the 1" attachments, they're just better. If you don't agree with me, tell me why. Tell me what I'm missing down in the comments below. Additionally, I just like the aesthetics of the 1". Now 1" holes all the way around, 2 inches on center. I do prefer a offset hole pattern, just my personal preference. I think it just aesthetically looks good. It looks the way it's supposed to look. And the way I attribute it is it basically looks like the adult version of an erector set, which is adaptable and versatile. Now the third reason is because brands that have both a 5/8" and a 1" line, they're gonna focus a lot of their efforts, whether it's development, marketing, whatever. Like all the nicest things are going to be for their flagship 1" line. This became especially evident to me when I got the LT1 trolleys, basically the day they came out, and I got them for my old blue Monster Light rack. Now when I got them in, one of the things that I thought was really cool on the Monster series of the trolleys was it came with like that butterfly switch that looked like the trigger on a Modus. Now, I've shot the Modus. I think the Modus is a lot of fun. So I wanted that, but because I had the 5/8" line, I was basically getting the leftovers from the development. So the functionality was like there, but it really wasn't ideal to what I wanted. So in conclusion, I think that the savings, which is basically the only thing besides west side hole spacing, which is dumb for most people. So the savings attributed to getting the 5/8" version of any of these racks, it's really just not worth it. So unless you are only doing squat, bench, and deadlift, and you have like a ton of space to where if you want to do accessory movements, you can just purchase extra stuff. Sure, maybe the 5/8 inch works just fine for you, but if you're like me, where you're in a very limited space and you're having to use your adult erector set, your power rack, as basically your one-stop for everything piece of equipment, the 1-inch version is just where it's going to be at. So whether that's the PR 5000, whether it's the Rogue Monster series, the Soar Neck, Surplus Strength, since upgrading to my 1-inch, I've basically had no regrets. In fact, I really appreciate the fact that I don't even miss the 5/8 inch. I had to take apart a Rogue Monster light rack the other day, and I actually was amused as to how small the bolts were. And like I said, I'm not arguing that the bolts on a 5/8 are going to come apart. They're not. The bolts on a 5/8 are more than adequate to hold that rack together. The J-cups are more than adequate to perform the movements. It's just not better, awesome, and badass. And that's what I want you guys to do. So thank you for watching. And remember to always keep your training better, awesome, and badass.